Now we trust that you are comfortable.
We are, Kris. Thank you.
Indeed, and we thank you for your consideration.
You as well, very much.
We have suggested in the past, and it is noteworthy as well now, that when you observe the day is very nice, that nature is so beautiful, the flowers are pretty, the sky is awesome, the leaves are beautiful to look at. This is indeed a form of a deep appreciation and gratitude, often understood to be, of course, towards the nature and nature's wonderful display. But at the same time, it is worth paying attention to the fact that the beauty that you observe stems from the fact that you are also beautiful beings, projecting your inner beautiful landscape onto the canvas of consensus reality, onto the canvas of what you assume to be an externalized, physicalized reality system. Whilst in truth, you are observing some of the great beauty that exists in the depth of your being. So if you direct your mind and your awareness to the inner beauty as you comment upon the externalized beauty, then you might get a completely different feel for that particular kind of energy. And it may even begin to have quite an effect, perhaps subtle at first, but still have an effect upon who you are, directing your mind, your attention towards those things that are beautiful. And part of those things includes self, includes you. In and of itself, the nature that you observe is a projection of that inner landscape, externalized and so-called objectified in a manner for you to become more aware of your inner psychological landscape. That particular inner psychological landscape is often neglected. No mind paid to it at all. But when you do direct even a small amount of your attention to it, you may begin to recognize that this inner landscape of great beauty, great depth, is the very stuff of creation, is the very essence that the ancients objectified in the myths of the gods and goddesses. So do take a moment once in a while to reflect upon that beauty as it comes from within you. And you may observe a completely different experience. Does that make some sense to you?
It does, Kris. And actually, you've shared this with us before, and I've gotten quite good during the day at doing just that most of the time. And what you just shared with us is an effect that is felt. There's that great feeling of having that sense of seeing and smelling and feeling how nice it is outside. But when you do that, it does add to the experience. It's not super subtle. Definitely, I can sense it. Shift in the feeling of who I am at that particular moment. It's almost like there's a little expansiveness that goes on or something like that I describe it as. It's pretty neat. So yeah, so I'm trying to remember to practice. I'm doing pretty well.
Indeed, when you remark upon the expansiveness of the experience, it does touch at the very heart of what it is that you do as a species, that you create, you objectify or externalize some of the very powerful elements within that inner psychological landscape. So you do this in order to learn about the very processes involved in what you create as an experience. Your physicalized feelings and emotions and imaginings are quite literally projected upon this canvas of consciousness for you to observe what it is that you are all about. And that beauty is also meant to have you recognize, however slightly, that in spite of all the shenanigans that can go on and all of what people call the ugliness of the world, it is meant to help you reflect upon the very fact that in spite of these particular labels, there is still a great amount of beauty, and that beauty still comes from the human experience. Because the human experience is not something that is cut off, bifurcated, or divorced from the spiritual experience, the spirit of being. You do not have to kill your humanity in order to try and become some kind of higher dimensional being or vibration. If you cannot even admire and respect the smidgen of the great beauty that is you, then how can you appreciate any other kind of beauty? So we do strongly offer the suggestion that reflecting upon this inner beauty as you express it in the nature, take a moment, breathe it in, and make that the connection. Enjoy that linking, that communion. That is indeed a communication, not with the objectified or externalized world, but with you in all the ways you can think of it and all the ways you have yet to imagine it. How does that feel, Amy?
That feels like what I felt today, really. Today is the first time I've been in the woods for a long time, although I live in the woods, to really just go in. And expansive is such a small word for how it feels. And to bring it around to that is my inner beauty is a little bit more of a step. I remind myself of it. And I'm also still incorporating, let's just say, is a beautiful feeling.
Indeed it is. And it has little to do with how some people separate the work life, the pleasure life, the home life, the leisurely life, and so on and so forth. It is the life. You do not have to forsake what you do for a living in order to try and become more spiritual. In fact, you can inject a great amount of spirituality into your work environment, whether you work in construction or you work in retail, whatever it is that you do. Even if you work in the White House.
Oh,
So yes, please continue these small moments of internalized awareness and enjoy the experience.
It just struck me, Kris, that just before we began our meeting, at a very, very wonderful meal. And so as you were talking about the nature, I took the opportunity to do the same thing with that fantastic tasting meal that I had, you know, recognizing that it was me, and the experience from that me to this physicalized portion of me. So yeah, it's kind of nice to apply it to as many things as you can.
Indeed, your world would be quite different. Would this be applied on a large scale? Your medical sciences and your scientists are often worried about all sorts of epidemics, the swine flu, the this flu, the that flu. But they never worry about an epidemic of happiness, an epidemic of joy. And these are far more effective. They do not necessarily need, as in their terms, a carrier, because it is already everywhere. All it requires is an acknowledgement to turn the direction of your consciousness in such a manner that you begin to experience it, because it is already prevalent. It is simply covered over by so many shenanigans. Do you follow?
I think that we do.
yeah. Yes.
Now, would you have any kind of questions or comments or some observation of some kind? Now, there is only two of you, so you can speak both at once.
I do. I've been listening to Dan's session with you, the last one, about the audio, about the sound, healing, the sound that was used for many, many different things. I'm not sure if this is the right place for that, but I'll ask about that. And it also, I didn't have a chance to re-listen to Monday's session, but it also seems to go in hand with the light, the light that was talked about in the Monday session. So,
And please speak a little louder and clearly.
sorry. What was talked about in Monday's session, I didn't have a chance to re-listen to it, but there was some discussion about light in that session, and it seemed to correlate to the audio or the sound in the dance session. So I'm wondering if they're related, but I'm very, very interested in the sound, that was talked about in Dan's session?
Sound appears as a very separate experience from sight or touch or smell or taste, according to your various physical senses. Some individuals can perceive sound, but through particular visual spectrums, and vice versa, because they are not as separate as you assume. So a certain spectrum of light will also influence a particular spectrum of sounds. And the particular spectrum of sounds can influence and bring about a manifestation of a certain spectrum of light. Because ultimately, what occurs behind the scenes, if you like, behind your own physical senses, is a much more complex, almost the dynamics of the kinds of experiences that occur behind the scenes that are then broken down into sensory perceptions. Sight, sound, hear, taste, smell.
Yeah.
Is very complex and quite dynamic. But it is simply broken down in such a way that you can perceive it in a way that follows the filters of your perceptions. That which occurs behind the scenes exists on a platform that includes a far greater range. Some sounds cannot be perceived by your ears. Some colors might not be perceived by the rods and the cones within your eyes. Other kinds of experiences may exist that simply have no translatable platform. They exist nonetheless, and you do still experience them nonetheless, but in a completely different manner. Those particular aspects of those dynamics that are then translated through sensory perceptions are also very dynamic, but you only think of them as sounds, sights, touch and smell and taste. But they do interact together once they also release a reaction or affect a reaction to your senses. You need to interpret them so that it makes sense to you, and that which does not is often left on the psychological cutting room floor because you simply have no particular types of preferences for them. Does that make some sense to you?
It does. It does.
Now, those particular dynamics that exist behind the scenes, so to speak, can be perceived, and they are perceived, usually through what you might call your dream bodies. Some people refer to them as your etheric bodies, your astral bodies. These are all different names for the same thing. Your dream body. Now, you have many kinds of dream bodies that are able to translate information in ways that you might not be able to when you are physically focused. But the dream bodies are not necessarily physically focused. They exist in a particular range of experience outside of the kind of physicality that you recognize as the world, reality. Their particular range is also reality, but because it does not fall within the particular concepts you are utilizing and accustomed to, they might not necessarily register right away. The dream body, each one with its own unique, expansive, we will use the term brain, mind, and ego, somewhat different from the manners in which you are accustomed to, their own intelligence. But their intelligence is a shared intelligence with each other and with a greater body that you might then refer to as your entity, essence, and so on and so forth. Because it can translate experiences and data and psychological impressions from other realities and realms in ways that may eventually reach you so that you can understand a bit more of yourself. And it is always ever so helpful when you accept the very possibility that your dreams have validity, as much validity as anything you can conjure, imagine, and think and experience whilst you are physically awake. But it simply exists on the different spectrum. You exist on a particular spectrum. Your dream bodies exist on various other scales of those spectrums. And they bring new information. They work out details. Some of them explore particular domains or dimensions that may lead you to discover that you are always more than the sum of all of your parts. So when you think you do little but sleep for 6, 8 or more hours, we are sorry to say that you are probably more occupied than when you work and are awake. Does all of this make sense to you?
Yes. Not sure all of it makes sense, but a lot of it does. A lot of it just really fits. Makes a lot of sense.
Look at it this way. When you are at home, you are home Amy. When you go to work, you are work Amy. When you go shopping, you are shopping Amy. When you go to the theater, you are theater Amy. You are always Amy, but you operate on different spectrums. You operate in different ways. The work Amy may not necessarily be concerned with anything in particular about home or home Amy, correct?
That's correct.
So all of these various Amy's function very well within an umbrella spectrum, but each one has its unique potentials and possibilities and whatnot. Compare your dream bodies in a similar manner, and you will see that the comparison is quite apt. except that work and home and theater have a completely different meaning to those kinds of Amy's. And at one point, the Amy that you think you know in all these various ways may not necessarily be prevalent. She may be something else. Another kind of Amy that you may know little about, unless you start paying attention to your dreams. Now, if only those Amy's would pay the visa bills, it would be so much nicer, wouldn't it?
It would be perfect. I do know the thing that stays with me about the dream Amy is that the dream Amy is most of the time much more much more sure, much more happy, much more alive, much more involved. It's pretty fun.
It does make perfect sense in many, many ways, because Dream Amy does not necessarily doubt herself. Dream Amy takes direct action. In fact, you may recognize that Dream Amy may be in one type of geographical location, and in the blink of an eye, Dream Amy is in another location, and she does not necessarily worry about that.
Very true.
So your particular experiences in the dream states, and this applies to everyone, your particular experiences in the dream state can teach you so much more, especially if you do lack some kind of confidence, especially if you are uncertain about yourself, or second-guessing yourself, or judging yourself. Dream Amy, in your case, might very gladly help you overcome these situations. And she will give you hints and suggestions. She may show you how to behave completely differently, so that your experience of life is that much more enriched. And the more you are enriched, the more Dream Amy also becomes enriched and can pursue other kinds of experiences.
Ah, now that makes sense. Truly does.
The dreams are practical in ways that your species has hardly dared ventured into any kind of research. You may think that your dreams are the results of eating some bad cheese, or perhaps watching a bad movie, a horror movie of some kind, or that some things happened to you in the past. But those particular kinds of dreams are also very practical, sometimes in alluding to solutions that have, quote unquote, eluded you.
Very true. Very, very true.
And what say you, Mr. Chuck?
Well, one of the things I was thinking is that the effects that you were talking about just a little while ago with Amy, about the help we can get from Dreamtime, we can kind of enhance that by directly asking for that kind of help, if I'm correct, right?
Indeed, but it does require a particular understanding. If you make such attempts, but are also convinced that dreams are useless, then you will not get very far. But if you do put a certain amount of understanding into the deeper psychology of your own self and dreams, and begin to understand that dreams can be most helpful, then you literally up the ante on that one. But if your dream self goes through all of these troubles, if you like, for lack of a better word, brings you solutions and you think this is all nonsense, dreams are silly, then you might not expect much cooperation in the future because you set the precedent. So set a different kind of precedent. Set a base of understanding that your dreams can and are very helpful. They might need a little work at first. Just like when you begin a new job, you do not expect to work 100% the very first few weeks even. There needs to be a learning curve. Similarly, if you have not paid much attention or given any consideration to your dreams in the past, then expect that there will be gaps. You might have to kickstart your particular understanding and beliefs about dreams before you notice just how potent and helpful they can truly be.
And it
Does this
strikes
make
me,
sense?
yeah, I was going to say that, and it strikes me too that just like anything else, the more I practice, the more information I'll actually get.
Indeed, because of an old adage,
You
you
get what you
get
focus
what you
upon.
concentrate on. Indeed. And if you focus upon that, you get more of it. Just like if you focus upon appreciation, you get more of it. Focus more upon love, joy, and creativity, you get more of it. That is how it works.
It's a very nice recipe to be familiar with.
Indeed. It works in reverse as well. The more you focus upon and concentrate upon all the miseries in your life, it seems inevitably that more shows up because you are willfully neglecting to focus upon anything else but your self-pity and misery. So it is about how you apply and use that powerful instrument that you call the mind. And this is just a term that you can relate to. Because the mind is not necessarily a physical thing. You cannot say it resides here underneath this hair follicle or on the tip of your finger or anywhere else, because it is pervasive. It is spread throughout all the atoms and molecules and the quantas and the consciousness of your physical and non-physical form. And your mind is not limited to your physical form. We hinted at that when we talked about the various kinds of dream bodies and the various kinds of intelligences and minds. Do you remember?
Yes, now that you mention it, I do.
So there are so many things to discover about your wonderful selves. But taking the attitude of Tigger is a wonderful thing in itself. Anything else you might like to discuss, please feel free.
I think one of the things that is kind of forefront for me, just because I just got done with this type of an experience, was the benefits that can be had by immersing yourself in that expression of self that we term to be nature. Forests, woods, streams, mountains, things of that nature. You know, we were immersed in that ourselves for about 6 days, and it is so very nice to allow the pace that's prevalent there and the effects that can be had there to be experienced. It's really enjoyable.
Indeed, as we suggested some time back, one of the major noticeable affectations of being in the nature, in the forests, in the hills, in the mountains, in the lakes, is that first of all, the nature does not ask you to be anything but yourself. So you are free of particular labels. Secondly, it internalizes the experience of self. You are not having to respond to other human beings, excepting those that are there with you. So you do not have to pretend to be anything else. Again, just you. But the internalization puts you in touch with your own deeper nature and all of the wonders and the beauty of it, and portions or parts of that energy reflected out into the natural environment, the trees, the brooks, the rivers, the lakes, the waterfalls, the flowers, the plants, the earth, the clouds. So all of those things come together then and bring your awareness within in many different ways so that you can rejuvenate yourself. You can get in touch with yourself once again. It is unique in the sense that you can have a similar effect whilst being in the city, whilst being at home. But when you are in the nature, it is pronounced, much more prevalent, especially that all of the sounds of the modern civilization are very far away. You now are listening to the sound of the breeze rustling the leaves. You are listening to the sounds of the birds. You are listening to animals and water and wind. So all of these together are very soothing. They de-stress. So it is useful if you are in the home in a stressful situation to put on nature sounds as a background music, short of having classical music in the background. Having whale sounds can also be very soothing because they too speak for an ancient portion of your being. So whilst you are immersing yourself in the nature, your mind is drawn away from the literal cacophony of the quote-unquote rat race, for lack of a better word. Do you follow?
I do, and the effect that I've been experiencing as we've done this repetitively throughout the years, largely in association with the information you've provided, is that I seem to be able to carry more and more of that staying focused within into my city experience, my job, everything that I do in the city. And it seems to get more and more prevalent each time that I do it.
It is not unheard of. In fact, it is often the aim of immersing yourself in the nature, in the forest, so that you can retain the impressions, you retain the experience, you bring it with you, and you allow yourself to still reflect upon it, even though you are in a different environment. So that too can bring healing. That too can also be shared with others in such a way that the serenity, the peace of mind, calm can simply flow from you. The effects of being within the nature, within the forest, create a particular kind of sound that eventually is imbibed in your cells as it returns to that natural state. And wherever you go, then you take the forest with you, and that flows from you. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It makes me think that, what I'm actually doing there too is expressing more of those deeper layers of me, facilitated through being in that environment.
Indeed. And you can become much more practiced at it. You can, in a moment of meditation, for instance, choose to revisit your recent experiences in the nature, literally projecting yourself back there, knowing, of course, that back there is inside, and continue that connection. The energy of the hills and mountains and trees and the forest and the lake, the waterfalls, the rivers, the birds, and so on, exist within you because you make it happen in that sense. So you can return to that state internally and continue to benefit. And you might even find yourself communing with that internalized nature, communicating with that internalized nature, exchanging with it, knowing how it can also create, utilizing your imagination as the playing field and kind of personification, if you like, of that nature in a way that continues the energy exchange. Do you understand?
Yes, I was thinking in that direction as you were saying that too. To even as you go back and remember, have a little exercise where it's almost like a daydream, and just let it continue. Like you're there and you find yourself doing activities that you didn't do memory-wise, but it's like you kind of open up an imaginative daydream or whatever, and just continue the adventure.
Indeed. In that particular state, you might even go further. Say there is a large tree that you have internalized, exchanging with it. You can utilize the tree to expand the scope of your perceptions by simply unifying the thread of oneness that connects you with the tree, and experience its perceptions of its environment and its presence, its particular state, as it might continue the exchange with itself through you, observing through your perceptions what that environment is like, and in that way educate and enrich itself and enrich those other trees in its environment.
That sounds like a fun exercise.
Indeed, it is, and it can be very profound.
I bet. I'm looking forward to trying it a number of times.
Me too.
Often people say, listen to the trees, listen to the wind, listen to the leaves, listen to the nature, for a very good reason. And it is not that they might speak to you directly about yourself. They might not be inclined to say, oh, Amy, you're such a wonderful being. But they might instead convey to you some deep-rooted, forgive the term, but some deep-rooted feelings that communicates to you the state of its existence. And how it communicates with its relatives, the other trees, with the mountain upon which it grows, the underground streams, or the riverbed that it may draw its water from, or the sun that draws light and energy and warmth from, or more. So listen, not with the intent to be praised or to reply, but with the intent to be open to learning. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Yes, it does, very much.
And by the same token, the tree will not necessarily be swayed when you entertain thoughts of how beautiful you are, Mr. or Mrs. Tree. It does not see itself in that way at all. It is not a tree in your sense. You perceive it that way, but its authenticity, its entityship might be quite different from what you perceive and think of it. Because it too is a sentient being. It is just sentient on another spectrum from the way you are sentient. Now then, might there be one last observation or inquiry?
I'm not having anything pop to the front of my mind. Amy, how about you?
Not at the moment.
Then indeed, if you enjoyed this lovely little exchange, do feel free to invite others to share and participate in these exchanges. And with that, we return Joseph to your naturally beautiful selves.
Thank you very much, Kris.
Thank you, Kris.
It is 8:24 p.m.